I was born in Detroit in 1949. I lived there for the first 6.5 years of my life in the city on Dexter Avenue in Cortland, and went to kindergarten and first grade there, learned to read in Detroit. Have my earliest primordial memories are of Detroit, of the Bob Lowe boat and Metropolitan Park and Verner's Ginger Ale and the Tigers at Briggs Stadium. It has a very important personal meaning to me. It was the Super Bowl of 2011 when my team, the Green Bay Packers, even though I'm from Detroit, I'm a Packers fan, were playing in the Super Bowl, and at halftime, I was watching the game in New York City at a bar and not paying too much attention until I looked up at the screen and saw an interstate sign that said Detroit on it, and then I started watching it. And it was the most moving commercial showing the iconic scenes of Detroit, the Joe Louis fist, the Diego Rivera mural, this car driving through the streets at Woodward Avenue, and it turns out it was Eminem in the car with this hypnotic beat, and he pulls up to the Fox Theater and gets out and walks into the theater, and there's this black gospel choir on stage rising in song. And he says, you know, this is the Motor City, this is what we do. And I started choking up just watching this commercial. My wife said to me, basically, you sucker, they're just selling cars, why are you falling for this? But it meant to me that Detroit had some really special, deeper meaning to me, and that's when I started thinking about how I could write about it. Detroit is a great city, was a great city. And the book takes place in 18 months in the early 1960s, from October of 1962 to May of 1964, a period when Detroit was booming in so many different ways. They were selling more cars than ever before, when Motown, the great musical enterprise, was just becoming a national, international fame. When civil rights was being essentially funded from Detroit in so many important ways, when labor was strong, and all of these things were happening to show what Detroit gave America, which is an enormous amount, but also you could see some of the shadows. Motown is an amazing story of homegrown talent of extraordinary proportions, starting with the founder, Berry Gordy, who started it with $800 and found this incredible collection of talent from Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, Temptations, the Supremes, Martha and the Vandellas, Marvin Gaye, Little Stevie Wonder at age 11, Mary Wells, all of this incredible talent coming right out of Detroit and taking the world by storm. And I sort of show how that happened and the reasons why it happened. Detroit was still the dominant place in the whole car industry, even though some of the manufacturing was moving out of the city. But Ford and General Motors and Chrysler, the big three, were all there. And I write about them selling more cars than ever before. The Detroit Auto Show is where the book starts. It was like to the auto industry what the Academy Awards are to movies. But I focus on one car that came out at the end of my book, which is the Mustang, the Ford Mustang, which sort of became the symbol of the 60s and freedom and liberation in a sense. And I tell how that car was built and sold. Detroit in many ways is the capital of the American labor movement. It's where the largest labor organization was, the United Auto Workers, which was really the progressive side of the labor movement. One of the main characters in the book is the then president of the United Auto Workers, Walter Reuther, who was not only instrumental in helping bring the working class into the middle class through great jobs and pay, but also was helping fund the progressive movement, and especially the civil rights movement of that very important era of the 1960s. The center of the book, really, the tent pole, as I call it, of the book, is June 23rd, 1963, when Martin Luther King came to Detroit. Detroit was the center of the civil rights movement in so many ways. It had the largest NAACP local branch in the country. It had many leaders come out of that place. But on that day in June, King came to Detroit. He led a march down Woodward Avenue of 150,000 people in support of the Southern Civil Rights Movement, which so much tumult had been going on that summer from the protests in Birmingham, where King was jailed and where there was sort of a police riot against the civil rights movement. So there's this long march in support of the civil rights movement in Detroit. King gets to Cobo Hall and delivers the I Have a Dream speech in Detroit 2 months before he did it in Washington. So it's sort of showing how important Detroit was to the civil rights movement. You know, Detroit was not only booming economically and artistically in 1963, but was also trying to become sort of an international city. And they were the U.S. nominee to get the 1968 Olympics. The decision would be made in 1963. And they thought they would get it. Detroit had had a lot of support over the course of several previous attempts to get the Olympics, and this was their time, they thought. And I sort of explore why they did not get that, their fight with Los Angeles, sort of the Rust Belt versus the West Coast glamour, and what that represented in terms of America, the struggle within America. But I also raised the question of what would have happened had Detroit gotten the 1968 Olympics. It would have been fascinating in so many ways. These were the Olympics of Tommie Smith and John Carlos' raised fist, of Black Power. The 68 Olympics would have come a year after the 1967 riots in Detroit. Would those riots have happened? How would the city leadership have dealt with urban problems in the years leading up to 68 had they been about to get the Olympics? Most people tend to blame the fall of Detroit on three elements: fat labor contracts, the riots of 1967, and municipal corruption in later years. And yet what I show in the book is that in 1963, you could see Detroit's collapse. As a matter of fact, the sociologists at Wayne State University predicted essentially what would happen, that it would lose 500,000 or more people every decade, that most of the productivity would move out of the city and the city would struggle. And it was because of structural problems having to do with its sort of company town aspect in terms of relying on cars, and also really a sort of anti-urban attitude of those car companies, which is a great irony. They helped, the cars helped move people out of the city into the suburbs. Henry Ford, whose grandson, Henry Ford II, is a major character in the book, and the original Henry Ford was completely anti-urban. And I call that the infected heart of Detroit. What I try to focus on in so many ways is what lasts. And what Detroit gave America has really had a profound effect, not only on the country, but on the world. Of course, music always lasts, and Motown is as popular today and will be 50 years from now as it was 50 years ago. So there's the magic of the music. The car industry was essentially founded in Detroit, which brought up the working middle class, which is, in so many ways labor is struggling today, and yet that rise of upward mobility comes out of Detroit as much as any place in the country. The Mustang is still around, even though it's fatter and not as cool as it was in its earliest days. And civil rights, of course, has made enormous gains, even though there's still many of the same echoes of problems today as there were 50 years ago. I try not to choose between my books in terms of which one's the favorite. Every one has a special meaning to me. I think because I was born in Detroit and because it's a struggling place and I root for underdogs, and because there's so much vibrance that comes out of the stories of this book, that it means an awful lot to me.